One of my favorite Sun Media personalities, Peter the Whore Worthington. Now, I've had it out with this guy before over his support of genocide against Palestinians, but this one's going to take on religion just a little bit different context. Now, the New York Times published an article by an atheist group that suggested to people that they consider leaving Catholicism. Now, Peter the Whore Worthington, being a Catholic, had a bit of a problem with it. The ad was made by the Freedom from Religion Foundation, which paid $38,000 to have this ad in the New York Times. Now, it questioned Catholicism. It questioned the wisdom of sending a kid to a school that was known to have problems with, priests touching kids, and then having it covered up at the highest levels of the church. A valid question, one might ask. Think of the acute misery, poverty, needless suffering, unwanted pregnancy, overpopulation, social evils, and death that can be laid directly at the door of your church's precious doctrine that birth control is a sin and must not be allowed. Hey, in my opinion and many others, these are some good questions to ask if you're Catholic. Now, this is along the lines of the questions that I asked myself when I was in Catholic school that ended up causing me to leave the Catholic Church. Now, I would have been a little bit more vicious in my criticisms, not just the issue of birth control, but maybe the tens of millions of people that have died at the hands of the Catholic Church. The Crusades. Now, instead of asking himself such questions, Mr. Worthington instead got upset that a similar one written about Muslims, the New York Times refused to put out. And he doesn't seem to understand the difference between the two. He called it, he basically referred to it as prejudice against Catholics. Now, there's just a little bit something wrong with that. Allow me, Mr. Worthington, to explain the difference to you, since you are a Christian, seemingly a Christian fundamentalist that doesn't seem to know the difference between living in a society that is a majority Christian and the fact that you're not living in a country that is majority Muslim. The fact is, Mr. Worthington, less than 2% of the population in Canada is Muslim. 77% of the country identifies as being some form of Christian. So it's kind of hard to cry the whole "we're being persecuted by Muslims" things when there's less than 2% of them. And most condoms are 97% effective, which means you have a greater chance, percentage-wise, of getting pregnant while using a condom than there are percentage of Muslims in Canada. Now, let me explain why running the Muslim one is bad and running the Christian one is good. Now, this is a thing that's not understood by the right wing a lot, and they call it persecution against Christians in favor of Muslims and the Muslim conspiracy. Well, let me explain something. The article on Muslims took the radical Islamic end and painted that as the general Islam that the regular general population of Muslims has, which it doesn't. It took the extreme view and painted that as all Muslims. Now, the criticism of the Catholics was their position on birth control, which goes completely across almost the entire Catholic spectrum. They weren't taking the extreme view of Christianity and painting all Catholics like that. They were taking the mainstream moderate belief of Catholicism and putting that in there. So you have a criticism of the regular mainstream Catholic thought and a criticism of the extreme Islam. So this is completely an unbalanced comparison that's trying to be made. If somebody put out one saying that all Christians want everybody who's not, Catholic to be dead, then you could make that kind of comparison. But it's not. It's totally biased towards the Christian side. Now, one of the reasons the New York Times said it didn't run the anti-Muslim ad was because they felt that at this time it would put U.S. troops at risk. Now, Worthington came out and called it a kind of cowardice, saying that it's okay to paint the Catholics as bad because they're not the villain. But it's not okay to say something about the Muslims because they are the villain. That was his interpretation. Now here's the real reason why they didn't do it. Because the Islamic world already believes that these wars in the Middle East are about going after Muslims. Now it's not. I don't believe it is, and I don't believe it ever was. These are wars for profit. Religion has very little to do with it. Religion is a nice little subtext that they can bring out and say that's what it's about. But these wars are not about being anti-Islam. These wars are about money and money making. Now, if the Muslim world already believes that's what these wars are about, putting out anti-Muslim ads might fuel that belief when they're trying to get rid of that belief in people, because that's not why it is. So they're trying to not make a bad situation worse by not exacerbating an opinion that's incorrect. That's why they didn't run it. It was not cowardice, Mr. Worthington. It's ironic to listen to you claim these people are cowards, the New York Times, for putting up the anti-Catholic ad, but not putting up the anti-Muslim ad, while you sit there and invent your own persecution against you by an exceedingly small minority, less than 2%, against a huge majority, 77%. Appears that for all your lauded World War II experience and your experience in the military, it didn't seem to teach you courage very much. Because it would certainly take more courage to be a small minority, like atheists, to take on the majority, which are Christians. That is real courage.